All right, so in several of my previous videos, you've heard me whine about the long, dark, wet, just relentless Washington winter that's been keeping me inside so I can't go out and do action videos and stuff like that. Well, I got my break in the weather, but now I'm buried under snow. So, yeah, and maybe being shut in for so long has been affecting my my judgment, my decision making in certain ways. This is kind of a continuation of the review I did on the Kingston Arms Renaissance side sword, and in that video I talked about what I would otherwise call my prehistory. Before I got into formal Japanese and Chinese martial arts, Japanese and Chinese swordsmanship, I'd always been a fan of fantasy and science fiction, and in my youth I'd acquired a number of European-style, shall we say, sword-shaped objects that were pretty terrible. Some of them were from Toledo, Spain, some of them were from India. And being shut in for so long, I just started revisiting those old paths not taken. And as I mentioned, back in the 70s, I didn't have access to HEMA to really learn how to use those things properly. And if I did, I probably would have gone down that path. And I may still. But idly reviving that interest. I'm not willing to spend a whole lot of money, but I still want to get decent swords because, you know, I like good swords. One of the swords that I had that I was looking to semi-replace was what Marto in Toledo called the Charles V sword. Now, they still call it that because they still make a version of it, and you can find it on their website. But the version I had a crossguard and a fishtail pommel that were Zamac, they were zinc aluminum castings with a really thin, terrible, almost like painted on brass finish, and then the grip was this terribly cheesy fake ivory. The blade was 440 stainless, and it was basically just a bar of steel with no distal taper, no edge. I had to put the edge on myself. Had some nice etching on the blade, but with very little use, like other Marto swords that I had, it snapped off at that rat tail tang. And then I took the blade, which is a pretty tough piece of metal, and I turned it into a gen, and I used it for several years, and then gave it away to a fellow student in need, and never saw it again. But so, looking for a replacement, an analog of that, I came across this. Ronin Katana's Euro number 4 Italian arming sword. Fishtail pommel, right? Crossguard, right? Also, Italian, I suppose that kind of suits me because I'm half Sicilian, so that's sort of appropriate if this really is an Italian design. I don't know for sure. Again, I don't have formal training education in these kinds of weapons, so I'm just comparing them to what I know of swords in general and my personal preferences. And I like it. And like I said, I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of money on it, so what did I spend? About $265 at Sword Buyer's Guide. And you can get it for a similar price at Cult of Athena if you have a preference between the two. Now, Sword Buyer's Guide got this thing to me for a very cheap shipping cost in like 3 days. So that's one of the reasons why I go back to them. But I've done a lot of business with both, and I like them both. So it's probably available at other places as well. Ronin Katana. And they have a pretty good reputation with some problems that you'll see other reviewers talk about. So let's talk about the good and some of the bad of this particular sword. Now, they also make a hand-and-a-half longsword version of this. And the reason I picked the shorter one is A, because I seem to be stuck inside more than I like to be and don't have the room, and B, this fits the dynamics dimensions of a gen, so I can use it like a gen until I learn better, which I may hopefully do in the future. But until then, I can use a sword that's basically shaped like this in a functional way. And this sword is quite functional. So for $265, what did I get? Well, let's back up a little bit now that I can do that with the new microphone. All right, so 30.5-inch blade from the way I'm measuring it. 7-inch hilt. Now I'm measuring from the guard all the way to the end of the pommel. And the fishtail is actually useful for getting most of another hand on, if not all. I mean, I have tiny hands, so I can get 2 full hands on this thing. And the edges are not uncomfortable for doing that. So I wouldn't put a lot of power and pressure into that, but for assisting a cut or a parry, yeah, I can do that just like I would, with a gen. It's doable. The blade has a diamond cross section. It has a fuller running for about 2/3 of the length, and it's all very well done. Planes are all very even. There is no real significant secondary bevel on the edge. And I've heard people complain that Ronin and other Chinese-made Euro swords are not very sharp out of the box, or they're unevenly sharp. This one is very nicely sharp on both edges for pretty much the full length. So that's pretty impressive. The weight on my scale is a surprising 2 pounds 10 ounces, lighter than I expected. Point of balance measured from the guard for me, 3.75 inches, 3 3/4, which makes this sword in my range of sweet swords in terms of balance and weight. So one-handed, even with my injury, this is very handy. And yes, I can use it like a gen, and sort of use it in the very few techniques I know about European swordsmanship as well. Not even going to say I know anything useful about that at this point, but maybe in the future. Anyway, blade is 1075 carbon steel. It's got a little bit of flex to it. Not much at all. But given the profile, the dynamics, and the edge, I did get a chance to take this out and put it through more than what I would consider basic test cutting. I did several bottles, and then I did a lot of cardboard. And this thing loves to cut. It really likes cutting for me, so I was very impressed by its performance. So yeah, that's all good. What's not so good? Let's talk about a couple of things that I did have a few problems with, or wasn't terribly impressed with. One of which, the most glaring thing when I pulled it out of the box, is the pommel had gotten bent just a little bit, about 5 degrees, enough to kind of make this transition on one side completely straight between the pommel and the handle. But it took a little bit of bending to get it back, and it hasn't bent since, at least with the use that I put it to so far. The pommel is peened, and the transition is pretty much invisible at this point. Maybe over time it'll start to show up as the metal ages, but so far that's a really good transition. Everything's tight. It's not the most perfect seam. Other reviewers have pointed out higher end swords you get a much better seam between the guard and the blade, but this one's not bad. It's not uneven. There's no glaring gaps. The grip is comfortable mostly, in terms of having leather over this cord ribbing, and it's got a good cross section to it, so you've got good edge orientation. But one of the things that's bad about it, other reviewers have pointed out with a lot of Ronin and other manufacturers, some of them put these really pronounced stitching ribs on one side, and yeah, that's uncomfortable. Some would say it would allow you to index and tell, if you've got a sharper edge than the other edge. But I don't have that problem. Both of my edges are pretty much completely equal and sharp. So I don't really need that. It doesn't really do anything positive for me. It's just kind of annoying. The edges on the crossguard are very clean, but they also came quite sharp. So I did take a little bit of fine sandpaper to the edges. It really wasn't becoming a problem until I tried to stick my index finger over the top of the guard, and I don't know if that's proper for a sword like this or not, but I gave it a try just to see what it would feel like, and I realized, yeah, it's kind of sharp. So I rounded those just ever so slightly. But that's my only nitpicks about the sword itself. Otherwise, massively impressed with it. And all that cardboard cutting, I cut some really thick double layer boxes too. No scuffing or anything. It barely looks like it's been used at all. So, good. Let's talk about some more mixed stuff. The scabbard. It's wooden, covered in leather. There's one seam on just the edge. It has a nice tip, conical shape, I think it's called. I don't know the nomenclature for European swords very well. But nothing on the scabbard mouth. It's just sort of folded over leather that's glued in place. But it is cut to fit the cross-section of the guard. So it's snug. It holds the sword, I would say, pretty well. It doesn't easily fall out. There's a little bit of rattle towards the tip, and the blade is awfully thin towards the tip in certain ways. What's not good about it? Well, you're looking at it. This hanger system. I feel like the grip and the scabbard cover itself are actual leather. But these are definitely plastic. They are fake leather, and really, really bad fake leather that's just sort of kind of cord tied on here, and then some rivets, and then these buckles are dedicated to attach it to in name only a sword belt that came with it. So, yeah. I heard another reviewer refer to this as something from a Halloween costume, and that is a really good description. Actually, this is a terrible, flimsy piece of, yeah. And for some reason, it's not adjustable at all. It's just sort of everything's riveted into one place, and for whatever reason, they decided to make the buckle just so it's on the opposite side completely of where you wear the sword. And I don't know if that's got any historical accuracy to it, but for me that's just weird and uncomfortable. It doesn't hold the sword very well in any way, shape, or form. And my advice to Ronin Katana, if you hear this, is just don't. These make it look kind of cheap, and they're not very useful. Just do without the whole hanger thing. And I'm probably going to go ahead and remove these, but I wanted to show you the sword while they were still in place before I cut them off. Because, yeah, just let the buyer get their own hanger system. Save yourself some production cost and pass it on to the consumer. Hey, there's an idea. But, yeah, I'm just really not impressed with that whatsoever. But the sword as a whole, I really like it. And again, inspiration to go down those roads not taken in the study of swordsmanship. This is quite inspiring. So you're probably going to see a few more reviews of not terribly expensive, but hopefully high quality European sword reproductions, and then you may get to see me struggle with learning something entirely different in my old age. So stick around for that. Hope to see you again. Hope you found this interesting and informative. And here's hoping the snow clears up sometime soon. I'm running out of groceries.